Hi everyone, Pastor Sam here. I want to share with you today something from Mark chapter 14, which is the next in our series going through the book of Mark. And it's the story in Mark 14 of Jesus having his feet anointed with expensive perfume. The disciples rebuke this woman, and then Jesus tells them not to rebuke her. What she's done is a nice thing. And it's a fairly well-known story. You can go read it in Mark 14. I encourage you to do so. But what I was thinking about when I was just reading it was relationships. It's interesting in life, we always have these times when our paths cross, times when we see someone or we have an interaction with someone. Just this morning I had coffee with some old friends I knew from Europe years ago when we were living there. And they happened to be in Tucson. They happened to come by our church on Sunday, and then we had coffee with them and visited with them, and it was just a wonderful time of mutual edification and encouragement and everything. And what's interesting is sometimes I read the Bible, and we have the story of Jesus and the story of his life and death and resurrection, but then we don't have a whole lot afterwards. We have Acts, and there's some stories there, but not a lot about the other disciples. And I wonder so much sometimes how many times these people in these stories bumped into each other after the fact or got together and shared and reminisced and remembered these things. And I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did at some point. And I was thinking this morning, gosh, what a blessing it is when we have shared experiences and shared passions and shared whatever with people that we get to talk about, that we get to experience, live and relive together. And I think it not just applies to relationships when we bump into old friends like I did this week, but also when we, think about our stories in our life and what God has done in our lives. I don't know how often you look back and you remember and you reflect on the great things God has done, but this is also what's coming up with Thanksgiving. Sure, we have lots of food and family gathering, and that's great, but what are we doing? We try to give thanks. We try to remember the things God has done. And so it's also helpful in our lives, just like we do in relationships. We reminisce, we go back, we remember things. It's also helpful to think back about the things God has done in our lives, the things God has taught us, times we've learned great lessons in our journey and in our walk with God. And so as a devotional thought for today, maybe take 5 minutes, maybe take 10, find a quiet space in the car, or in between tasks, or maybe before you go to bed tonight, and stop and think, what are the things that God has done? What are the things God is still doing? What are the things I'm really grateful for that God has done? And actually this week, this Sunday, coming up at church, we're going to have a time to share some of those testimonies of the good things God has done. And I hope you come and I hope you share because God has done great things. And so when you realize those things and you remember those things, also share them with people around you so that they would hear these stories of the great things God has done. And in doing so, we fulfill much of the mission of Christ. And so today, wherever you are, wherever you find yourself, I hope and pray that you remember the things God has done, that you find your heart filled with thankfulness and gratitude for the goodness of God. And so I hope you take that with you, and hopefully we'll see you this coming Sunday. Thanks, and God bless.